Okay, let's dive in. We're seeing terrestrial biodiversity taking a huge hit globally. And the main culprit right now, it's habitat loss.
Yeah, primarily driven by, well, how we use land farming, forestry, that expansion. It's relentless.
Exactly. And we've got these really ambitious goals out there,
Mm.
not just stopping the decline, but actually reversing it,
Yep.
bending that curve back upwards.
But that's the core tension, isn't it? How do you do that and feed a growing global population? More people, often wanting richer diets. It seems like a direct conflict for land.
It really does. So today we're digging into a key piece of research that tackles this head on. It's the Nature paper, Bending the Curve of Terrestrial Biodiversity Needs an Integrated Strategy, with David Leclère as lead author.
A really significant study.
Our mission here is to unpack their findings. What specific mix of actions could actually shift us from this downward spiral towards, well, genuine recovery by mid-century?
And it's crucial because, let's face it, current conservation efforts, like just setting aside protected areas, they haven't been enough to stop the bleeding globally. This paper really asks, can we hit ambitious targets without wrecking food security? That's the million-dollar question.
Okay, so before we get to the potential solutions, what's the starting point? What future are we looking at if we just carry on as we are? The base scenario, they called it.
Right, the baseline. It basically follows what's called the middle-of-the-road shared socioeconomic pathway, or SSP2.
So not worst case, not best case.
Exactly. Think moderate population growth continues, diets kind of stay on their current trajectory, including high meat consumption in wealthier regions, and we see, the usual slow improvements in farming tech and conservation. It's the muddle-through future, basically.
And modeling all of that land use, food trade, biodiversity response across the planet, that sounds incredibly complex. How did they approach it?
Oh, it was definitely complex. They used a really robust method to handle all the uncertainty involved, a multi-model ensemble approach.
Okay, break that down a bit. Multi-model.
Yeah, they linked 4 different integrated assessment models, IAMs. Those handle the economic and land use side, with 8 different biodiversity models, the BDMs, which look at the ecological impacts.
Wow. Okay, so multiple economic perspectives feeding into multiple ecological perspectives.
Precisely. It gives you a much stronger sense of the range of possibilities. And it allowed them to track 9 different biodiversity indicators, covering 5 key aspects of biodiversity.
Like what specifically?
Things like wildlife population density, which is a very direct measure, but also the extent of suitable habitat left for species, and even projecting risks of regional and global extinctions. So a pretty comprehensive view.
And using that powerful setup, what did the base scenario tell us? What happens if we just muddle through?
Well, it's sobering. The models project that global biodiversity decline continues, unfortunately, and the rate of loss between now and 2050. It looks like it'll be similar to, or maybe even worse than, the rate we saw from 1970 to 2010.
So no slowdown at all. In
No.
fact, potentially accelerating loss.
That's the projection. They estimated peak losses could reach something like 54% for wildlife population density by mid-century compared to historical levels.
Yeah, where are those losses hitting hardest?
Concentrated in the places richest in biodiversity, sadly. Sub-Saharan Africa, South and Southeast Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean. The hotspots are really feeling the pressure.
Okay, a pretty grim baseline. So to try and change that trajectory, the study looked at different strategies. Let's start with the single action ones. What if we just massively ramp up conservation? The C scenario.
Right, the conservation scenario. This modeled a really ambitious effort, expanding protected areas to cover 40% of all land. That's, way beyond current targets, plus large-scale land restoration efforts.
Sounds like a big step. Did it work?
It made a difference, definitely. It was actually the only single strategy that, on average across the models, managed to make the losses peak before the end of the century, so it started bending the curve.
How much of the damage did it prevent?
On average, it avoided about 43% of the future losses predicted in that base scenario, which is substantial, nearly half.
But clearly not the whole story if it only avoids 43%. What was the problem with just relying on conservation, even at that huge scale?
The big catch was the trade-off with food. If you take 40% of land off the table for potential farming, Even with restoration, it puts immense pressure on the remaining land.
Ah, so food prices.
Exactly. The models showed that this level of conservation, on its own, would likely lead to significant increases in global crop prices, reversing the trend seen in the baseline.
Which makes it hard to sustain politically and socially, especially for poorer populations.
Precisely. Can we afford biodiversity if food becomes unaffordable? That's the conflict it highlights.
Okay, so conservation alone, while vital, hits this wall. What about the other single actions? Could we just focus on the supply side, make farming super efficient, the SS scenario?
Yeah, the supply side scenario looked at that sustainable yield increases better trade networks, and it reduces the land needed per ton of food. But even with optimistic yield gains, the sheer growth in demand more people, richer diets still meant agriculture needed to expand. It couldn't spare enough land on its own to reverse the biodiversity trend.
Okay. And the flip side, focusing purely on demand, reducing waste, changing diets, the DS scenario.
The demand side approach. They modeled things like having food waste from farm to fork, which is huge.
That alone sounds incredibly powerful.
It is. But even that, combined with some diet shifts like reducing meat when modeled as a standalone strategy without the supply side and massive conservation boosts, it slowed the losses, but it didn't bend the curve downwards globally, not on its own.
Right, so each single approach has its limits or creates unacceptable trade-offs. This leads us directly to the core argument of the paper, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The need for integration.
Exactly. This is where the integrated action portfolio, the IAP scenario, comes in. It's about doing all of it together.
And not just doing all three, but doing them ambitiously, right?
At an unprecedented scale, yes. It combines the increased conservation efforts, see, that full 40% protected area target, plus restoration.
Okay, and the supply side SS efforts.
That involves pushing for sustainable crop yield increases and efficient global trade based on a more aggressive green growth pathway, SSP1, not the middle-of-the-road one, maximizing efficiency.
And then the really transformative part, the demand side, DS. What did that involve in the IAP?
This is where the big societal shifts come in. It required that 50% reduction in food waste globally, field to fork, by 2050.
Which is massive in itself.
Huge. And crucially, also a major global diet shift. Specifically, a 50% substitution of animal-based calories with plant-based calories in regions where consumption is currently high.
Wow. Half the meat and dairy swapped out in developed countries, essentially. That's politically challenging, to say the least.
It absolutely is, but the modeling shows why it's potentially necessary if we want to achieve the biodiversity goals without the food price crisis.
How does that integration solve the food price trade-off we saw with conservation alone?
Because by tackling demand so aggressively, less waste, less resource-intensive food, like meat, you dramatically reduce the overall pressure for agricultural land.
Ah, I see. So you free up the space, economically speaking, to do the big conservation push.
Exactly. Reducing demand and increasing supply efficiency simultaneously means you can set aside that 40% for conservation without causing food prices to spike. The combination breaks the trade-off.
Okay, that makes sense. And the results for biodiversity under this IAP scenario, how much better was it than the 43% loss avoidance from conservation alone?
Significantly better. The IAP scenario avoided at least 67% of the future peak losses projected in the baseline. That's 2/3 of the damage prevented.
And did it actually bend the curve?
Yeah.
Achieve reversal?
Yes. Critically, under the IAP, the downward trend in biodiversity caused by habitat conversion actually reverses course by 2050 in nearly all the model combinations, like 96% of them.
So genuine recovery starting mid-century.
And starting decades earlier than if you relied only on, say, conservation plus trying to restore land after it's already been damaged. It's proactive.
That's a powerful result. Thinking broader now, what are the implications? This integrated approach, the IAP, it's not just about saving species, is it? There are other benefits.
Oh, definitely. Huge co-benefits, or synergies as they call them, very much aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals.
Not just.
Well, human health is a big one. Those dietary shifts towards more plants, generally much healthier. Plus, by easing the pressure on land, you also see benefits for climate change, reversing the trend of greenhouse gas emissions from land use.
And other environmental pressures.
Yes, things like pressure on water resources and nutrient pollution from fertilizers. The IAP helps limit the increase in those too. It's a win-win-win, potentially.
Okay, but we need to be clear about what the study didn't fully cover. Its main focus was habitat loss from land use, because that's the biggest driver right now.
That's a critical point, yes. A necessary limitation to make the modeling tractable. The models didn't fully incorporate the impacts of other major threats.
Like climate change.
Climate change is the big one they acknowledge. But also things like invasive species, pollution, direct overexploitation of wildlife. These weren't the primary focus.
And these other factors are obviously important and likely growing.
Absolutely. They might affect fewer species globally than land use change right at this moment, but their importance is increasing and they interact with habitat loss. Climate change, especially, will be a massive driver.
So the IAP provides a pathway to solve the land use part of the crisis, but achieving a full reversal of biodiversity decline needs even more.
Correct. The paper is clear on this. A complete bend in the curve requires this integrated land use strategy plus other major interventions. Most importantly, ambitious global action to mitigate climate change.
Which brings us back to the core takeaway message then. Bending the biodiversity curve isn't just about better conservation policies in isolation.
No, it demands moving beyond those silos. It requires immediate, really ambitious efforts that combine strong conservation, like that 40% protection goal, with a fundamental rethink of our food systems. Specifically, tackling waste and making significant shifts in diet, particularly in high-consumption countries.
Yes, reducing waste drastically and shifting towards more plant-based diets are non-negotiable parts of this integrated solution, according to the models.
So perhaps a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. The science laid out in this paper suggests it is possible. We have a pathway, technically and ecologically, to bend the curve by 2050 through this integrated portfolio.
The possibility exists, but the scale of action required, that 40% protection, halving waste, the 50% diet shift, that demands a level of global cooperation, political will, and societal change that, frankly, we haven't demonstrated consistently before.
So the challenge isn't necessarily knowing what to do anymore.
Perhaps not entirely. The biggest hurdles now seem to be in governance, policy implementation, leadership, and actually getting everyone pulling in the same very ambitious direction. It's less about the model now and more about making it happen.